Woods, and I'm with the Veterans Breakfast Club History Project, and I'm here today with John Miller, an Air Force veteran, and we're going to capture his story. So John, why don't you start telling us a little bit about how you ended up enlisting, what time frame it was, and a little bit about the background on why you ended up choosing the Air Force.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Lawrence. And first, I must say, I really appreciate this opportunity. I think it's too many people, veterans, die without having a chance to share. And I think some great stories get lost. So what happened was in 1963, my older brother, Roy, got accepted at the Air Force Academy. And after about 2 years of his, or about a year of his involvement there, I got to thinking that I would, in terms of a career, I'd love to work for NASA, the Space Administration. And it occurred to me that the Air Force Academy would be probably the best place to get a preparation for that. So I decided to apply myself, which I did later that year, 1964. And in November, I received a telegram from my representative that I had been nominated the principal for a slot he had at the academy. I was greatly delighted, and long story short, ended up there 7 months later.
You ended up going to the Air Force Academy?
Left in June of 65 and graduated in June of 69.
Excellent, excellent. So tell me a little bit what it was like at the academy. Not many people get to experience one of the 4 service, or actually 5 if you count the Coast Guard, service academies.
Yeah, well, it was a mixed bag. It was, let me just start off with the highlight. We were exposed to something called core values there: service before self, excellence in all we do, and honor. And actually, I wrote a piece about that, about a 10-page piece, because it was so impactful, while I was there and in my active duty afterwards and throughout my life, to keep those in mind and do my best honorably and, be of service. So those were, I would say, deeply embedded as a part of our 4-year training there. I was blessed with having 2 really great, they call them air officer commandings, the officer in charge of our squadron. Had 4 different ones over the span of the 4 years, and 2 of them were great, 2 of them were not so great. And sadly, the 2 ones that were great mostly got killed in action in Vietnam. The squadron I was in my last 2 years was a superb bunch of guys. We really got along well, and I keep in touch with a number of them today. And that was when my 3rd year was when we had this really terrific Air Officer Commanding Major Jack Espenscheid. He really knew how to inspire all of us to do our best, but to do it in a cheerful, upbeat manner. So the couple of challenges I encountered at the academy, number one was, as in my first year there, and it came primarily from the fact that I was just from a very small town in Minnesota, very naive to the world. And unfortunately, I had a couple roommates that took advantage of that and really abused the opportunity for us to be together. It was profoundly humiliating and disturbing. I'm not really going to go into it, except to say that it happened, and definitely it colored my experience with being there, and certainly left me with some trust issues. But the remainder of my time there, I probably would say I excelled in one surprising way was serving on the boxing team in our squadron for 3 seasons. And last 2 seasons, I was undefeated, had 10-0 record, and I was really proud of that because I was the kind of guy in high school that if someone said, "Hey, you want to fight about this?" I would say, "No." so, so it was a good place to test and to prove to myself and to those around me that I could take care of myself if I needed to. And of course, you never know in combat when that can come to be a very useful skill.
Absolutely.
So that, and I was a pretty good skier. I was not so good at academics, not so good at military training, but I was surprisingly a good boxer and a good skier. I would probably also say that we did have an honor code that we were operating under the whole 4 years there. And as I said, that was a very significant part of our training. At one point I had brought with me a hunting knife from Minnesota, where I was born and raised. Didn't have a sheath for it, decided to see if I can get one made. I talked with the shoe repairman. "Can you make a sheath for me?" "Yeah, sure, I'll do that." A couple weeks later, he came out with this really nice, I still have the knife and the sheath today. And he had me sign the receipt for it. We had a cadet account, for everything that we purchased.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm signing it, and I see that it says shoes and heels. I'm sorry, soles and heels. SOLES, soles and heels. Well, I gave him back the receipt, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, what's going on here? Well, apparently he as a civilian shoe repairman did not have permission to do something personal for a cadet like that.
Okay.
And I had signed that statement as though it was a repair job. So that was technically a violation of the honor code. And on the other hand, I felt concerned about him. What would happen if I turned him in as having falsely written out this receipt for me? That was a big struggle, in an atmosphere like that. It was a big struggle for me. I didn't share it with anybody. And I ended up erring in favor of him and did not report it. But it's an example of something that kind of weighed on me since then, and just, shows the importance of integrity, doing the right thing on the moment, in the moment. And because later on it might have some, unintended consequences, as it would have been in this case with that employee there.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just one example of the core values and their importance. Certainly the boxing was a chance to practice the excellence, and the service issue, the third of the core values. I had a little bit limited opportunity to do that there at the academy, other than I was asked as a senior cadet if I would coach the boxing team for our squadron, because I was the only one in my class in the squadron who had been on the team as a junior, second class cadet, as we were called. And so I agreed to do that, and I was happy to serve that way. It wasn't until later in my active duty in the service, though, in Thailand, that I really had a chance to, I think, exercise that better. I had a lot of interest in the Thai culture there. Well, of course, we had many Thai employees on base, and I chose to offer to teach English to them as a volunteer during my lunch hour. And that was really a profoundly moving experience that they, at the end of my tour of duty, they gave me a little cigarette case, which I also still have, a little embossed cigarette case, and they had all signed it inside. On the case, they put "To Sir with Love," the movie, Sidney Poitier's movie, which of course was an interracial
Right.
movie back then. And again, that was profoundly touching to receive that.
It sounds like,
So, go ahead.
no, I said it sounds like it would be.
Yeah, indeed. I want to touch on one other event of my cadet years, which was the day of graduation, the evening of graduation. A classmate of mine was getting married in the cadet chapel there, and I attended the ceremony. And then afterwards, as a new lieutenant, I went to the officers club on base for the first time ever. Of course, we weren't permitted there previously, just to enjoy a drink. Well, here is the air officer commanding of my squadron there with another AOC having a drink. And I should back it up by saying my brother was very instrumental to me in one particular vein there. That was when I was in the second class year, and I was going through some struggle about should I finish my 4 years or should I hang it up and do something else. What I decided was I had this burning desire to fly, and so I wanted to finish my 4 years there, and so I could do that. Well, then a few months later, my brother stops at the academy on a cross-country flight of his own in pilot training. And he says, if I were you, I'd think twice about going to pilot train. It's not like the sales pitch that they give you here at the academy. Well, he was a major role model in my life at that point. I gave it some hard thinking, but he definitely colored my attitude, and based to a large extent on that, I chose not to accept the full pilot training after graduation. As cadets there, we had 30 hours of flying in a T-41 trainer. Well, of course, the AOC of our squadron got wind of that. He was very displeased about it. That night after graduation, I see him and one of his cohorts there, and they're telling me about their disappointment, basically, that I wasn't choosing pilot training. Well, then they step off by themselves and are conversing. Then they come back and just very quickly, in the moment, pick me up off the floor, have me horizontal, take off my military shoes, and take them to the bar and fill them with beer. And I acted like it was all in good fun, but it was not in good fun. I was deeply angered and humiliated that they would go to that length just because I was choosing not to go to pilot training. Okay. I was certainly serving the Air Force in other capacities as after graduation. But I'll tell you, it really killed my interest at that point in pursuing, a military career, which had been my intent in high school and when I went to the academy. So that was it.
I had never heard of a story like that where commanding officers would show their displeasure of a junior officer in that way. That's
yeah, it was
something
disgusting.
you'd expect us enlisted guys to do that, not so much the officers.
Right. Yeah. Well, Yeah. So I tell you, it took me a long time to. I don't know that I ever got over it. I mean, I remain a little bitter towards him today. Have
I
had
can
no
imagine.
contact with him. I really wish that I had thought about the judge advocate office back then and pressed some kind of legal action. I think it might have helped me get over it instead of having it festering as a sore, for years afterwards. Anyway, I wanted to just touch on that. Stuff does happen even in a training place that is supposed to be honorable like that.
Right.
Things do happen that should not have happened. So I left the academy. I did blow off some steam with a couple of months of a solo motorcycle trip that I took around the Southwest. Visited my brother and so forth. He was stationed then at Williams Air Force Base in Phoenix. And then I settled into my first duty, which was now you were in the Air Force, Larry?
I was security police. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So AFSCs. I was in,
Right.
what was it? 7464, I think it was. It was a manpower, management engineering, doing efficiency, studies, staffing studies of
Hmm.
places on base. This was in Kelly in San Antonio. Pretty boring duty. Did it for a year and a half. Had the chance to get out of there and transition into the public information office on base because the sole officer there was resigning. Had permission from my OIC to do that and got placed there. That was much better duty, doing news articles about things happening on base and tours and this kind of thing. Then about 9 months later, the Air Force initiated a race relations program because of racial violence that had occurred on a number of bases. Actually, all 5 branches of the military initiated this program.
Hmm.
To me, that really spoke a lot more strongly. Like I could really commit myself to it.
And what
And
year? And what year would that have been?
that was January of 72.
Okay.
And so I again went to the same OIC who had placed me in the information office. I said, look, I really feel committed to this race relations program. Could I transfer into there? And I'm amazed that in the span of my 3 years at that point, he let me again transfer into this new career field. I think it probably happened because it was a hot field.
Hmm.
And so they wanted, motivated people to serve in it. So anyway, I transferred into that field and really found something that for me became a profoundly moving experience. It was profoundly stressful, but I really felt like I was making a contribution. Funny thing about it is that when I was entering, let's see. Okay, January of 73. Okay. So in about June of 72, the officer in charge of my previous duty said, you've been about 3 years since you were commissioned. You're probably getting to be pretty hot to be transferred someplace. You might call Randolph and see what's going on. So I took his advice. I did. And the gentleman there said, Major Pickens was his name. He said, yeah, you're going to be probably in about 6 months' time, you're going to be transferred out of Kelly. So I said, where am I going? He said, well, you have a 50-50 chance of going to Vietnam or to Thailand, unless you choose to volunteer someplace. And I said, well, where can I volunteer? He said, well, you'd have to extend beyond your 5-year commitment, but you can go to Incirlik in Turkey. You can go to I think it was Azores. And I think the third choice was Greenland. What's the base in Thule?
Thule,
Yeah,
Greenland.
yeah,
The end of the world.
right. Well, of course, all three of them were so profoundly attractive to me, it was hard to choose. So he said, think it over and let me know what you'd like to do. And I talked with some people who had actually been stationed in Thailand, and they said that it was, you're going to get shot at a lot less than you will in Vietnam. Well, I forgot to mention something else. The reason that is significant to me, being shot at, is because in my senior year at the academy, one of my classmates did a English essay. We were in both the same composition class.
Mhm.
He did an essay on the history of the Vietnam War. In so doing, he pointed out that the French had been defeated, but in 1956 there was to have been a UN-sponsored vote to determine the unification of North and South Vietnam.
Right.
He said that the United States refused to allow that to transpire.
That's
And I guess
exactly right.
basically,
That's exactly right.
basically told the South Vietnamese, I forgot his name, to not to go along with this. Well, I found that astounding that a democracy like our own the government could refuse to allow another free election to occur. Well,
Yeah, Diem and Eisenhower both had done polling and found out that Ho Chi Minh had an 80% approval rating and would have won in a landslide. And they just disallowed the vote,
right.
even though it had been part of the Geneva Convention.
Yeah, that was astounding to me. I thought that is so corrupt that I would say I really lost support of the war at that point. I'm kind of surprised that I continued on, serving. I mean, I could have resigned at that point and then finished my 3 or 4 years as an enlisted man in the Air Force rather than, an officer. But anyway, that didn't occur to me, and I continued on, but now I had this pretty jaded attitude towards the war. So when this Major Pickens gave the opportunity, I thought, well, I'd much rather serve, if I could, in Thailand over Vietnam. And he said, you can volunteer for it, and that will pretty much wrap it up for you. So I did, and then I immediately completely forgot about ever having done so, went on with my duties at Kelly for the next 6 or 7 months. And then let's see, during that time frame, I got trained in the race relations at Patrick Air Force Base in Florida. Went to a civilian church in town, very small storefront church with a buddy of mine. Traditional church service, but at the end of the sermon, it's a woman, minister, older woman. She starts pointing to people in the congregation and telling them to stand up, and then gives them advice about the coming week or something, like prophetic advice. So then she points to me. I'm thinking, what's going on here? So I stand up. She said, I see you going to Southeast Asia. in 6 months' time, specifically to Thailand. And I see you getting into this kind of work there. And she said, see me after the service and we can talk. Well, I did, but I thought she was a real whack job. And, she had some instruction or something, but I thought, no, this is too much. And I backed out of it. Well, then I forgot about it. And 6 months later, I'm in Thailand. And this buddy that I went to the church service with is stationed in Hickam in Florida and Hawaii. And he writes me and says, isn't that interesting that woman minister predicted you were going to be in Thailand in 6 months? So how she did it, I don't know, but it was just an interesting little piece of my history there. That was a complete surprise because I had forgotten about what had transpired between me and Major Pickens there in Randolph. So anyway, I thought, okay, she's a nutcase. And, well, 6 months later, there I was in Thailand. So I thought, okay, there's something going on here. And I didn't think too much about it until near the end of my duty then. I ended up extending in Thailand because had I left after a year, I would have had to do a PCS move to another base and thereby extend about 6 months beyond my first commitment. And I had kind of not a very good attitude at that point and didn't want to do that. So started doing the race relations there. I already had been placed in that field at Kelly. Got
Well,
the program started.
one quick question. Which base were you sent to in Thailand?
Urupao.
You were down in the south.
Yeah.
So
in the Gulf.
Right, because I know a lot of the bases, because I had some friends that were stationed in Uborn and Udon, and they got hit in the late 60s. They got hit fairly often because they were close to the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Oh, right.
And because of the planes that they were flying out of there, the Viet Cong would actually divert into Thailand and attack some of the bases there. But my understanding is Tok Lee and the base that you were on, they didn't really have that kind of activity.
Yeah, I remember just one time seeing the flares go off on the perimeter of the base. My quarters were pretty close to the perimeter. And I think I was told that it happened one other time. I don't know, a couple of guys trying to get on the base for whatever reason.
Okay.
But I wanted to say that I think we had really good training for this field at Patrick. It was a 7-week training in residence there, all branches of the service. And I think the game changer for a lot of us was seeing a 3.5-hour documentary called From Montgomery to Memphis, which detailed all of the civil rights marches and all the violence and so forth that happened against King and so many other people tragically back then. And I'll never forget the NCO that was working for me at Kelly. He and I came to Patrick together in my pickup truck. And we went across the Deep South, I might mention, with a white girlfriend of mine. And he was very apprehensive about driving across the Deep South, even being in the same vehicle with white people. I mean, he was grounded in reality and I wasn't. I mean, I had no idea what to expect.
Right.
But before we went to the training, he was telling everybody on base, I think we have a human relations problem. It's not a race relations problem. Well, he and I went through that training. We saw that, like I say, 3.5-hour documentary, and he came out of there, tears flowing down his cheeks. And, he and I never again after that talked about having a human relations problem. It was clearly racially grounded, So the training was good.
Let me ask you a question about your training.
Yeah,
You started your training in 72.
right.
Um, I think I know all of that training stemmed out of the unrest that was happening in Vietnam,
Right.
late 69, 70, 71. Because when I was there in 67, 68, at least at the airbase I was at, there was very little in the way of racial animosity.
Ah,
But I know that later on, as the war went on and there were more um, draftees as opposed to enlisted in all branches.
right.
There were more heavy drugs that were introduced, and the racial animosity picked up. And as a result of that, this training stemmed out of that. How much of what happened in the end of Vietnam, that last pieces of that, right before you had your training, how much of that affected the training that you guys had?
Well, it didn't, I would say. I do not recall any mention in our 7 weeks of what was going on in the moment, like you say in Vietnam or other bases. The only
Uh,
mention, yeah, the only mention was in the beginning of the training. They said this came about because of a lot of incidents of protest and violence on bases, stateside and overseas. And
wow,
that's the only mention I remember.
interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, we completed the training and went back to the base, got the program going at Kelly, and then I was shipped out to Utapao. My predecessor at Utapao had left before I arrived, as so often is the case when people go PCS. And so
So much
there
for
was an NCO
transition.
there, Roman Quintana, who had been doing the training with this officer, and training was terminated when the officer left, and so he and I got it going again. We were joined by a black NCO, James Dickerson, and the three of us had a terrific team. You know, I mean, you would hardly know that there was a rank distinction amongst the three of us. We just had a very tight team, and I certainly valued their suggestions and so forth, very highly as being the ones who lived through prejudice and discrimination, whereas I hadn't, you know. And so I think we put together a really good program that towards the end of our tour of duty there, we had to try to amp it up. So they got the B-52 bombing missions out of the base were winding down. And so the 3rd Air Force commander, the SAC commander there, assigned 3 of his, unfortunately, all Caucasian officer pilots to help teach the program. They turned out to be really good instructors for seat of the pants teaching, but it was done very, very quickly. But so we did get a couple thousand people through the program, and we gave anonymous critiques to everybody who attended. I was really pleased that we had to turn in reports every week to the base commander of those critiques to show how it was being received. I still have my OER, the officer evaluation from my commander there, framed. Because reason I did that is because he promised me the Bronze Star recommendation at the end of my tour of duty. But he said he wanted me to write up the citation. Well, I thought that is bullshit. I mean, write up my own citation. I couldn't do it. Frankly, now I wish I would have, because it would have been nice to have been honored with receiving that, But in his evaluation of me, he said that the instructors have achieved a 97% effectiveness rating on anonymous course critiques. It was an 18-hour program. It lasted a week, each week we did it. And like I say, it was anonymous. And so people could say whatever they wanted to. So the fact that 97% of them said that this course is effective in improving human relations on base, to me, it was like getting the Bronze Star. It was a really, really, deeply moving experience to have achieved that, even though I would say it was done at a considerable expense of my mental health, my own mental health. I was friends with the base psychiatrist. He and I were tennis partners, and we met quite often to play. They had a court on base.
Mm-hmm.
So at one point, I'm realizing that what I would probably say is that my sense of who I was disintegrating. It was collapsing. I don't know how else to express it, because I did not. He said we'd have to be done on the record, and I didn't want to, like a lot of guys, I didn't want to have a formal record of having been, seen for psychiatric evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't have made any difference, except maybe got me out earlier. Looking back on it, would have been to my advantage. But like so many guys, I didn't want to have it on my record. So I I chose to not pursue it. Instead, I went to my commanding officer and said, look, I need some help. I'm not doing well. I'm not going to be fit when I leave the military in 6 months if I stay in this job, unless I find a way to cope. He said, I will help you if you need some adjustment, but he said you might consider learning. This is from an Air Force major who had just come from the Air Force Academy as an instructor, a professor.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you might want to consider learning meditation. Yeah, is right. So here we are in the Friends of the War Zone, and in the daily bulletin, which he pointed out to me, is this notice: anybody who wants to learn yoga and meditation, meet in this room at this time. And it turns out there were 2 swamis that came from Bangkok once a month and taught on our base as an official approved recreational activity.
Wow.
Yeah. If you knew our base commander, you would say, no way in hell would he approve something like that, as far off of the mainstream. But it was there, and I started pursuing it, and I found it of enough benefit that I was able to stay in the career field for my last 5 months of duty and finish it out. However, when I did, I should also say, before I get into the separation, that it was also something I deeply appreciated, was being stationed in Thailand for not quite 17 months, 16 and a half months. Because I'm doing this race relations program for the military, and I'm finding that a lot of those same military are treating the Thais with disrespect and acting prejudicial towards them, And so most every one of our classes, we addressed Thai-American relations, even though it was not in our curriculum to do so.
Mm-hmm.
But I just came to deeply appreciate the chance to be there, to live in another culture, learn from the people, and to realize that there was more than one way of doing things, and to honor both ways, both traditions. It was, for me, probably the best part of my military duty at that point, was to have that chance to do that. I actually wrote up my experiences there in about a 12-page Word document about 10 years ago, because I didn't want to lose track of what had gone on
Absolutely.
there.
Absolutely.
So anyway, discharge, and I'm free as a bird, feeling high. Decided to go visit some of my military buddies who are now, half of them were stationed in stateside bases. And so I got a Greyhound bus trip pass. Back then they had these 30-day passes for $100.
Right. I remember those.
Yeah. So I did 2 of those and spent a lot of time with them. And I also, early on, my first trip, I should say, I still had a vehicle that I had in storage in Minnesota. So my first trip I made with that, and that was like probably 5-6 weeks. I'm driving through. This is like 3 months after my completion of my duty in Thailand, and I'm driving through Arkansas. I remember, decided to visit a museum, music museum there, of Nickelodeons and such like that, and was alarmed. I started having these violent impulses to smash these beautifully crafted instruments. So I left the museum, and then I started my drive south to Texas, and I started getting this impulse or this question: can I avoid driving into the oncoming traffic? It was like a 2-lane, highway. And that kind of scared the shit out of me. And at one point, I think same day or next day, there was a ranger tower. I decided to climb just to get a glimpse of the forest around there. And then I found this impulse arising as I descended to jump off of this tower. And these things collectively just were really pretty terrifying. This was, of course, before there was such a thing as a vet center.
Yeah.
They didn't happen until 81, I think. This was
Right.
74. So I didn't know what to do. Got back to Minnesota and did a couple things. One was ask my uncle if I could work on his farm, which was very close to my small town of Windham, Minnesota, when I grew up as a kid. And I had always just really enjoyed the farm as a kind of a special, quiet, retreat, nature setting type of place. And he welcomed me. And so I actually served there for 3 seasons, planting and harvesting seasons, and found it very gratifying to be able to do that, be away from people, just me and the animals, or me and the tractor plowing a field or something, and found a lot of refuge and support in doing that for those seasons. Of course, then I started reading in the VFW magazine, American Legion magazine, about all these farmer veteran programs that have sprung up since then. And I thought, yeah, I can relate. That's exactly what helped me so much. So I actually met one of the founders, Archie's Acres, a place out in California. And then I actually decided to move into a yoga ashram, to continue the training I had learned in yoga at the Urupau, which was tremendously helpful as well. And it still, I must say, it took decades of regular practice before the suicidal passed fairly soon, but the violent impulses, it took a long, long, long time to subdue those, and which I credit the yoga practice, the meditation practice with what enabled me to do that. Because like I say, I didn't know anything about vet centers until
Right.
years later. So that is pretty much what I wanted to say. I might have shared with you that I had the two good fortunes. One was to meet Jerry Yellen. Let me just hold up a picture of him here, if it'll show.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that shows.
He was a World War II fighter pilot who flew the last P-51 mission of the war in
Oh,
Iwo Jima,
wow.
out of Iwo Jima over Tokyo. The day that the peace agreement was signed, August 15th, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
there was no communication with their aircraft, of
Oh,
course.
wow.
So it was after the peace agreement was signed that he completed his mission over Tokyo. Anyway, I had the good fortune of meeting him in Fairfield here, 2011. And I mentioned that when we talked about our military service, I mentioned the Air Force Academy. He said he would like to speak there. I said I was in touch with the Academy superintendent trying to get a meditation program going there for the cadets to learn so they could have it
Mm-hmm.
preemptive to combat. So I said, let me write him a letter. And so I did. And he said, send him over here. 3 months later, Jerry is speaking to the cadet wing there,
Wow.
and 2012. And he asked to do it again. I got him there in 2017. He's 93 years old.
Yeah,
And the superintendent said the cadets loved him.
I can imagine.
And he was sharp as a tack. That was in February of 2017. In December, he passed.
Oh, wow.
But I was so pleased. Talk about service. I said that there was an incident of service. I was so pleased to have helped him fulfill. He in his last lecture there, I attended it. He said, I used to think my flying in the Air Force was the finest. But he said, speaking to you cadets here today cannot be beat. Thank you so much.
Oh, wow.
And my heart just warmed to hear him say that, because I had been instrumental in getting him there,
Yeah,
and it was the end of his life. It was like his dream to do that. And so I felt really, really fortunate that he and I had come together and we got that taken care of.
wow. You said there was a second thing.
Same thing was I was very grateful to have had the chance in September last year to attend Honor Flight in DC. And didn't know what to expect. Have you done Honor Flight?
No, I haven't. I have a number of friends that have. I haven't gone on one.
Okay. Okay. Well, I didn't know what to expect. And I got some names off the wall, my two commanders who had been killed in action there,
Mm-hmm.
and two cadets that I wanted to get their names too. And then on the flight home, we arrived back at Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and we are met by several dozen people. This is 9:30 at night on a weekday. Kids, 8, 10-year-old kids with their parents. Welcome home, veteran. Thank you for your service. And this didn't stop. I mean, they have what they call guardians that are
Yes.
with you.
Right.
Okay. My guardian, coincidentally, he had applied to the Air Force Academy about a year after I did. He ended up going to Notre Dame because he was Catholic. But anyway, so he said that he had not ever seen such a crowd for one of these events. He estimated it at over 1,000 people
Wow.
showing up. It was just wave after wave after wave, all staring us in the face, in the eyes. Thank you for your service. Welcome home. I got to the end of the line there, and he said, John, your face is covered with moisture from your tears. I mean, it was, if anybody that you know of has an issue about not being welcomed home, like from Vietnam, you know, you do this honor flight and it won't be an issue anymore.
Yeah.
Because they will feel so welcomed. The way it's handled, and it's all volunteer.
Right.
It's all funded. You know, I could go on and on, but we might be getting towards the end of our program, aren't we? I'm not sure.
Well, that's fine. You can keep going. But
Okay.
I have a good friend of mine in Ohio. She's a veteran herself,
Uh-huh.
and she's a guardian on the Columbus honor flights. And she does probably 3 or 4 honor flights a year as a
Oh.
guardian.
Oh.
She's dedicated to it. She is involved in the fundraising.
Yeah.
She's an absolute terrific person. And we have honor flights here in Pittsburgh as well. So I know what you're talking
Sure.
about.
Yeah.
I just haven't availed myself of one yet. But yeah, it's really something. It's really something to we have a very active veteran community here in Pittsburgh. So
Yeah. Oh.
yeah, and I belong to the Vietnam Veteran Honor Guard. And so for
Okay.
funerals and dedications and stuff,
Yeah.
we'll do the, presentation of the colors and the rifle salute and all of that.
Right.
So that reception that you're talking about, we experienced that as well. And there's
Okay.
nothing quite like it. There's
Yeah.
nothing quite like it.
Yeah. Oh, so touching.
After the
Yeah.
way it was 50 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe you know this, but those people that serve as guardians pay their own way.
Yes.
You know what? My guardian, it cost him, I think, $550 to make this trip, you know. And I mean, you can appoint your own guardian. It can't, I think the rule is it can't be a spouse. It could be a son or daughter. But I chose not to, and I was really happy that it worked out so well with my guardian and myself.
Excellent.
But so they give us this packet of letters, mail call on board the aircraft on your way home. I could show you, it's in the other room, but one of the letters I received, of course, they're mostly dear veteran, but
Sure.
they also get your spouse and, in my case, my brother and my sister to write letters. And
Oh, wow.
which they didn't tell us about. And my children all wrote letters.
Wow. Very
So
nice.
here's this package of letters, not only from these kids, but from family too. And you could imagine what a surprise.
Absolutely.
One of the letters I got was from a young teenage girl in Garnville, Iowa, very small town, maybe 600 people, I can't remember. She signed her name. And it was such a nicely expressed letter. I thought, let me see if I can find her in White Pages and thank her. So White Pages, here's Myers, Garnville, Iowa. There's a phone. So I call up, and this is, like about a couple months after the honor flight. I call up and I'm talking to a woman there. I said, do you know Grace Myers? And she said, yeah, she's my granddaughter. I said, well, let me tell you, she sent me the sweetest letter for my participation in honor flight. And I wanted to thank her. She said, well, her father is here. Why don't you thank him? He's having breakfast with us. So she puts him on the phone, and I tell her, you raised a very fine daughter there. And I tell what she had done. And he said, well, by coincidence, I am going to be the guardian for my father, who is a Vietnam vet, next month. He's going
Oh,
in
wow.
October of, not, no, not, yeah, I think it was October of last year. He was going.
Wow.
So I said, well, you're in for a treat. You get letters like this from people like your daughter. It's pretty special. So that was a real completion, I guess you would say, something like that, of my military service. And then I'm a trustee for the VFW post in town. And
Okay.
in May, the commander, so I go to most of their meetings, and in May, actually before May, it was a couple months earlier, the commander asked if I'd be willing to speak. And I said, well, sure, at the Memorial Day event in town. And I said, sure. So I fashioned my talk, here's 10, 12 minutes. I fashioned it around the core values that I shared
Hmm.
earlier. And gee, I must have had 10 people come up afterwards and thank me for saying how much it meant to them to hear that. So I was really very, very touched that I was able to share something that it was kind of like, doing the race relations thing all over again, doing something that reached a lot of people and moved them.
Well, I want to thank you for your service and thank you for participating and telling your story. Um,
You're most welcome, Larry.
and welcome home, John.
Thank you. And likewise to yourself, my good man.